friends, and welcome to the first template in six-figure emails. My name is Russ Schwartz. This one is called Markets Search for Meaning. If this is the first one you're watching, because you haven't skipped ahead and you're actually watching things in order, which is a really cool thing to do, this is how it's going down. So first we're going to start with the background on the template, just a little bit of backstory on how it came to be. Then we're going to dive into a bit more of the persuasion principles at play, really diving into the why we use the template, why it's going to be effective to add to your sales email sequences or your funnels or your launch sequences, and then where to use it within those sequences. Because as you'll see, each one of these templates that you're going to be looking at have different persuasion triggers at play that are going to be a little more relevant at some phases of the funnel, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So we're going to look at exactly where to use it, how to use it, including some questions that could evoke the material that you're going to be using for your copy. Then we'll look at the template itself, the step-by-step application. And finally, in the next video, we're going to see a teardown of examples so you can really see how this template works in the wild and how it has worked across many different industries. So with all that said, let's start with the background of Market Search for Meaning. So all this started a few years ago when I was just frustrated at what we accept as the norm in digital marketing. Why are people not buying? That was a question that really kind of rattled around my mind for years, really, at the beginning of my career, until I really went on a mission to find some answers. And really, the question that was driving this is why do we accept 1, 2, 5, or even 10% conversion rates as the norm? Within that, why are over 90% of qualified, ideal, perfectly targeted, perfectly nurtured customers still not buying? That's a lot of people who should be buying that aren't buying, and it just makes no sense to me why we settle for that without really digging into the why and trying to unpack that. And coincidentally, it was around the same time that I was reading Man's Search for Meaning, where I found some unlikely wisdom, which is really the root of this template. So this is what's going on. This is why we use it. So what I discovered in linking this ever-long quest to find out why 90% of people don't buy, while at the same time reading Man's Search for Meaning, is that ideal customers are subconsciously disqualifying themselves as buyers. And there are reasons for this. One of the biggest reasons is that there's a certain cognitive dissonance. There's something that they either did or didn't do in the past that they can't overcome right now. Because if they bought right now, it would mean having to address and confront this shame or this inaction or this action, this wrong action that they took in the past. So there's something at play there to look at. And another thing that we see when we dive into this template is that we need to acknowledge that where there's pain, and we talk so much about pain in marketing and copywriting, but wherever there is pain, especially where your prospect is implicit in having created it or having brought it upon themselves, there's always going to be a corresponding image or a self-image of failure, guilt, or shame around it. And these are not the kind of emotions that lead to buying behavior. So this is a double-edged sword of pain. Yes, we want to look at where there is pain. What are those bleeding neck pain points that are going to get our prospect to buy something that they urgently need to get solved? But when they are, or when they believe themselves to be responsible for that pain, then there's all this failure, guilt, and shame around it that isn't conducive. So we need to look at those elements specifically to disarm it. So what this template does is it gives our customer a chance to really relive and retrace their steps to that shameful or painful moment that they believe themselves responsible for, forgive themselves for it, so self-forgiveness, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, derive meaning from it. So this is a reframe. The classic Man's Search for Meaning logo therapy is all about reframing a situation. So they're going to be able to reframe that as maybe a positive event in their life instead of a negative one, which is going to give us a chance to then close the meaning loop through our product or service. So when we talk about opening a meaning loop, it's saying there was additional meaning to this moment that you didn't see before, and we can continue down that path through our product and close the meaning loop that way. So we're going to see how that plays out in a second. And then through that strategic reframing, this is really all about moving them from a place where they feel too disempowered or too ashamed to buy to a place where they say, oh, wow, maybe what I did back then was the most skillful thing I could have done. It wasn't my fault, and I could take solace in that and feel empowered to take the action I need to take right now. So that's really what we're doing with this template. Self-forgiveness is really at the crux of it and just creating a more empowered state for them to buy from. Cool. So let's go a little bit deeper into a meaning loop because it's one of the more advanced terms in these templates. So a meaning loop is really a more empowering diagnosis over a previous perceived negative behavior. So this is where you'll see later in our example, someone who is taking antidepressants and they felt a little bit ashamed of taking antidepressants instead of going on a more natural means of, getting through the hard times they were going through. So the negative behavior there, or the perceived negative behavior, is just giving in and taking, the medical prescription. However, what we can do is we could also show how that was the best, most skillful, most empowered thing they could have done at the time. And even though they see it as negative in their mind, it probably saved them from a worse off situation. So here we're reframing the entire thing. We're absolving them of the shame they feel around being in this negative experience, creating a positive association with it. And then we're leading them to remain consistent with those positive qualities. We're saying, hey, you were actually just doing the best you can. This was the most skillful thing in your best interest that you could have done at the time. Let's continue with that trait and look at the options we now have. And that's how we close the loop with your product and offer involved in that. Cool. All right. So at its core, this is what this email is coaching. These are really the themes of the email that are encouraging that buying behavior and trying to get us beyond that typical 1, 2, or 5% conversion rate. So self-forgiveness and acceptance is really at the core of this. This is your classic, it's not your fault, except we're giving more of an emotionally compelling reason why it wasn't their fault. We're actually validating them in the process, which creates a lot of trust and likability on our part. When we could reframe and diagnose that situation in a more empowering way, that creates likability and trust as us in a leader, or as us as a leader. Yeah, I think I said that right. Cool. It also creates clarity and understanding around a previous behavior, shedding light on why they may have done something in the past. We tend to avoid looking deeper into our motivations for doing something, especially when we feel a little bit of shame and blame around what we perceive to be a misstep. We tend to just kind of push it away. But if we, as the marketer, as a leader, could shed light on why they may have done that and reflect it back in an accurate and empowering way, once again, we're building trust and likability there. And then positive self-image as it relates to those previously negative events, actions. Yes, as marketers, we want to highlight the pain, but we don't want our prospects to feel blamed. We don't want them to feel like they acted in ways that were destructive to them in any way. So pain, yes, but not in a way that is disempowering to our prospect. And what we're doing here is we're reframing the event and offering them a more positive self-image, which is actually closer to the truth and of a really high service to our prospect. And then at the end, we're giving them a chance to stay consistent with that new empowering behavior or that new meaning through your offer. So that is what is at play here. Where to use it? So this is a very flexible template. You could use this as a standalone sales email, meaning not within the context of a launch or an evergreen campaign. This is something you could just send to your list right now, just as a one-off sales email. Or if you are going to use it within an evergreen funnel or a live launch, I would use this as an early sales follow-up after the conversion event, whether that's a webinar or a launch announcement email or a presentation. I would not use this too close to a cart closer and a funnel because it tends to be a little bit on the longer side. And as you get into those final 48 hours, you really want to be a little bit more to the point and really help coach decisiveness, which is a topic for another day. But this isn't about coaching decisiveness. This is really about empowering your prospect to be a buyer, and that tends to work best earlier in the funnel. Cool. So how to use it. Here are some questions to ask that I do encourage you to journal on. You're going to see these in a bunch of these templates. Take a few minutes to just write down whatever comes to mind when you go through these questions. You're really going to unlock a lot of potential content for this kind of email and also for your other marketing assets. So questions to ask: what bad behavior, and quotes, so perceived bad behavior or actions in relation to what you're selling might your prospect feel ashamed about? What external thing, whether it's a person, a common belief, can we deflect some of that blame to? Maybe they were coerced or manipulated or pushed into that thing, or maybe it was just a sacred cow in the industry and everyone was doing it and they felt that they had to, even if it wasn't really something that was driving right for them. Just where can we deflect some of that blame? Remember, it's not enough to just say it wasn't your fault. We want to offer an emotionally compelling and a rationally satisfying reason why it wasn't their fault. So this is where we can do that. And then this is really the meaning loop. So how was that bad action, in fact, positive, or just the best action they could have taken at that time, given their context? What additional pain may it have saved from them? So this is once again making it emotionally compelling, not just a marketer doing mental gymnastics to get to a result, but how is this true? What did that action that they perceived to be bad, how is that useful? What did it save them from? What did it help them avoid? Just anything you could do to show how that action may have been even more positive than they'd even think it could be. And then how did it prepare or empower them for this moment? A lot of people like to buy when it just feels like it's that perfect time and all roads have led here. So how did that initial misstep and what they went through empower them to take the action right now that you're asking them to take? Cool. So the template, which you'll see in action in just a minute, goes like this. So you're going to start by just telling a story about their experience of that trait, action, or behavior. So what was it that they did? What was that misstep? What was that mistake that they feel shame around? Just tell the story. Come out battlefield style. This is what went down. And then deflect the blame to something external. Bridge into why it actually wasn't their fault. Remember, giving that why is so important. You can't just say it's not your fault. Then you could talk about how that was actually positive, a good thing. So this is the opening loop, giving them a more empowering reframe on that situation. And now say, but there's a better way. So even though last time you were acting in, the best way you knew how, you now know a better way. So close that meaning loop, tie that to your offer. This is the better way that you're empowered to use now. So you don't have to repeat those mistakes of the past. And then you could overcome some surface level objections through some key features and benefits of your product. Awesome. So that is market search for meaning at a high level. Of course, you have the worksheet with some high level notes, as well as the template that you could download and refer to. And you can meet me in the next video where we are actually going to break down a few examples so you could see how this looks out in the wild. So thanks so much, and I'll catch you in the next video.